Different types of Blender users. I'd love to hear about which category you think you fall under, so make sure to leave a comment below. Number 1, the organizer. Out of 2 hours practicing Blender every single day, the over-organizer spends about 45 minutes renaming objects and adding them to the outmost branches of his overly elaborate and color-coded collections tree. The over-organizer justifies their obsessive-compulsive disorder with the fleeting happiness they'll feel when something goes wrong, and they'll be able to troubleshoot quickly. However, there has never in the history of time existed a problem so unsolvable or time-consuming that would require such a complex naming system for all objects. Does the organizer know that? No, of course not. Or maybe they do. Denial's a strong thing. Of course, don't let their holier-than-thou attitude fool you. Their frantic 2 a.m. search for an add-on that will finally allow them to rename each single vertex point seems fueled by a desire to evolve. But we all know it's just a sneaky way to procrastinate, actual practice. I mean, yeah, their asset library looks great. They beat a world record trying to find the most convenient obscure model for his latest scene. But who's got time to put a scene together when there are so many folders to be labeled and arranged by color with accompanying folder icons? Those of us who studied Aristotle will be able to tell that their behavior is irrational, but telling them that would be borderline dangerous. While this video is just for fun, if you are really serious about learning 3D art and how to create beautiful environments, you can check out my brand new environment art course called the Environment Artist Survival Kit, where you're going to learn everything from making flowing grass to fluffy trees and sweeping landscapes using Blender and Unreal Engine. As usual, link in the description. Number 2 is the boomer. Having a spiteful attitude toward the progress is the single most boomer thing in the world. Just like your weird uncle longingly reminisces the better days where men were actually men, the Blender boomer reminisces the better days when Blender was really hard to use. These types of Blender users believe that valid Blender users are those who select with the right mouse button, and that is final. They earned their badge by learning how to use Blender as Lance Armstrong was winning his 5th Tour de France. Of course, there must be a reward for his diligent dedication. None of these newer users know the pain of photocopying Blender documentation because they were still using dial-up. No one told them that their 10,000 hours to mastery would also be subject to inflation. What? What the f? The friendlier user interface that came with 2.8 flooded the community with many new users, valuable information, tutorials, and add-ons. Many more artists started using Blender to create impressive pieces and further popularize the software. With this new influx of users, it only infuriates the Blender boomers even further. Of course they're salty about it. They're no longer the cool kids. They don't have a mysterious skill that no one in their group of friends can even begin to comprehend. Now, when they try and pull the 3D modeling card on Tinder, the matches usually say, "Oh, like that ducky guy?" Now, the wise ones become tamer by the year and start using their understanding to help newbies with their questions. Naturally, they will cite themselves as sources, but most of us can live with that. Number 3 is the asset hoarder. The hoarder really like the idea that famous 3D artists use a lot of pre-made models and tools in their work. In fact, that is their entire motto. They are firm believers that Beeple never modeled anything from scratch. Otherwise, how could he have made a complete render every day since 2007? It's impossible. Thus, much of the hoarder's time is spent hunting the best Blender deals, scouting licensed freebies on Sketchfab, and requesting source files on Reddit. More serious cases can also affect the patient's finances. After all, there are only so many free models uploaded on BlendSwap by their, hang on one sec. 1.5 million artists. So what exactly do these hoarders do with their 3D Library of Alexandrias? Well, considering that their ArtStation page was last updated in March, I think I'll let Richard on the Unexplained podcast cover that one. Blender user number 4 is the add-on gremlin. And it all started with the Node Wrangler. The gremlin's nostrils caught a whiff of Blender's customization capabilities, and a thick, dark mist engrossed their mind, transforming their normal human body into a shriveled, desiccated shell, resembling that of a gremlin, forever searching for the perfect add-on that will make all of their problems go away. And it makes sense. Why would you save countless assets when you could just install a little thingamajiggy and generate them on the spot exactly how you want them? Plus, all the time they save by not having to place each ivy leaf manually on their haunted house scene? Priceless. The flexibility that they get from tuning their Blender install is unparalleled, and each new tool is carefully added to an intimidating arsenal of creativity. Are your 3 fans requesting a sci-fi scene? Kid Ops to the rescue! Someone in need of yet another post-apocalyptic Los Angeles scene? Blender GIS is there for you. I mean, sure, a lot of them rely on their resume to say that they're experienced with ArcViz when they can really just whip out a mediocre interior with ArchiPack. The possibilities are endless. Now, the downside to the gremlins, that they typically forget about the 12 add-ons they downloaded every other night, so actually, I guess the arsenal of creativity stays pretty much about the same. It's kind of like how Russia would keep its nuclear missiles hidden in the tundra and forget they actually have them, like depositing your paycheck into a bank account that you don't have access to. The idea behind it is right, but the execution gets overpowered by enthusiasm. Yes, overall, the add-on Gremlin is truly a powerful Blender user to be reckoned with if they could actually ever stop their modded version of Blender from crashing on launch. Too many add-ons. Number 5 is the disorganized. The chronically disorganized deserves our deepest compassion. This person is always at war with themselves and thrives in chaos. They both blindly trust their ability to find a file in the primordial hellscape that is their hard drive, while at the same time hating themselves enough to ensure they'll be looking for it for a couple of frustration-fueled hours. Now, where did I put that temp folder? Working on a large scene, the disorganized has to employ surgical precision. They know that once they deselect an object, their changes are basically permanent. It's gone forever. Of course, this isn't the case for sane Blender users, but the disorganized user allows their models to slip into a deep sea of untitled objects with each click into the void of the viewport. Will it be happy there? Will it ever ask about their parent? Maybe, but that's how strong models are made. Saving their projects into an obscure folder they'll never find again is their way to relieve the pain of being forgotten in a Walmart as a toddler. Of course, they could easily leave their trauma behind if the next time Blender prompts them to rename a file, they silence their ego just for a second and type in something other than genius idea v2, v2, v3, final, final. However, that would require introspection, if not therapy, and they don't have the time for that, not when desperately searching for one of the files they dropped into the abyss last week. Blender user number 6 is the anti-completionist, something I think a lot of you guys can relate to. When the anti-completionist takes a walk, they carefully analyze the texture of the gravel. Their camera roll is full of pictures of graffiti and obscure building facades that they intend to use for one of their projects that they'll never finish. The anti-completionists usually suffer from a mild case of asset hoarding and tutorial watching, but their main pastime is haunting the Blender hashtag on Instagram, or anything that involved not finishing the project they left over for the past 2 weeks. Anti-completionists love watching other people's work and trying to figure out how they make it. They also count this as Blender practice because, it just is. And every once in a while, they'll sit down with the program and try to bring one of their ideas to life. Here, they're faced with the grim reality of time relativity. That cute low poly diorama they envisioned earlier probably won't take 45 minutes to make, more like 4 hours. And thus, they succumb to despair and punch the ground, cursing the cruel mistress that is the overestimation of one's own skills. And one way to deal with this? Well, they bravely power through the blockout phase, so that they can later say they're actually working on something. Will they ever have a finished render to show for it? I doubt they'll ever find the time. The next annoying Blender user is the hacker. Much like your average anime fan, Blender programmers used to fly under the radar, embarrassed at their own nerdy existence. However, Mr. Robot changed that for a lot of people. Although the hacker doesn't need a mouse to use Blender, his knowledge is still limited to average programming skills he can't use to bring down any evil corporation, even though he wishes he could. He's the same person who threw a party to celebrate the Garuda version of Linux, then went on a 3-hour-long rant on how their friends should stop using Windows. The reason why the hackers insist on writing 12 lines of code instead of pressing 3 buttons is still unclear. If I were to make an educated guess, I'd say it's probably the fleeting feeling of superiority that they get out of it. After all, programming is the new literacy, and they don't have any time to spend on people who don't understand their arguments. Their Python arguments, that is. Their horrible Fedora-like attitude can be easily justified by the 3.7 seconds they win each time they use the command line rendering instead of the Neanderthal visual rendering option. Get good, noobs. The next type of Blender user is the tutorial watcher. Now, the tutorial watcher downloaded Blender a good year ago and went through the Donut series with a naive excitement. I mean, Blender's so easy, they thought. Their appealing little dessert is smiling at them from that super realistic looking marble counter, and the sky's the limit. That is, if they ever actually worked on a project of their own. Now, if only decision paralysis wasn't a modern affliction, Faced with the plethora of guided projects, the Watcher is partly grateful for the help, but partly confused by his prospects. Much like a starving man suddenly seated before a feast, they just can't choose the deliciously artistic product to focus on. And when they finally get out of their box of comfy tutorials and try to replicate results on their own, the unforgiving reality sets in. It's a lot harder when you're on your own. So, back to tutorials we go. What should we master today? Well, everyone's talking about this thing called retopology, so it must be important. Wait, what are n-gons? What happens if I want to model something for which there's no tutorial yet? How do people do this? You know what? This is all a little too scary. I think I'm going to go do my 600th Grand Avid low poly tutorial. That'll help. And we finally come to the last Blender user of the video and possibly the worst one of them all, the Blender fanboy. Yeah, listen, it's really cool that Blender is free forever. We've all seen their banner, but some people just take it too far. Seriously, these guys are the absolute worst. The fanboy is an unapologetic, diehard fan of Blender and can be found typically in their natural habitat in the comment section of my tutorial videos. Whether their passion for Blender is fueled by certain political economic affections or deep hate for the expensive 3D suites used by reputable studios, we'll never know. But one thing's for sure. They insist on dragging the Blender community through the most childish of YouTube quarrels. Whenever a fanboy sees a positive Maya review on the internet, their fingers itch with that juvenile crave to establish Blender dominance. The entire world must know that Blender is free and it is their God-given right to lead anyone out of the cerebral darkness. Their victims of hate are usually chosen at random, as an agent of karma like themselves shouldn't discriminate. However, they're only human. So if you're one of those godless heathens that can afford the 3ds Max, you will certainly feel their wrath in a YouTube comment section eventually. Hope you had fun watching this video this week, guys. We'll be back to our regular programming next week. Don't forget to let me know which type of Blender user you are in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video.